Gunfire cracked through Ravenrock Valley like thunder trapped between stone walls. SEAL Team Alpha was pinned down, carved into the hillside by relentless enemy fire coming from 3 directions at once. The ambush had been planned, precise, and brutal. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Hayes lay bleeding in the dirt, his uniform dark with blood, his breathing shallow, his team desperately trying to hold a perimeter that was collapsing by the second. Over the radio, through static and chaos, a voice cut through every other frequency: "Commander down. Taking heavy fire. Immediate support required." Those words carried the weight of absolute urgency, the kind that means someone is about to die if no one moves fast enough. At Forward Operating Base Falcon, Army Ranger Staff Sergeant Elise Grant heard that transmission while walking the perimeter. She didn't ask questions. She didn't wait for orders. She grabbed her gear and sprinted toward the helicopter as her platoon sergeant shouted after her that the landing zone was suicide hot. But here's the twist no one saw coming. The man whose life she was about to risk everything to save would one day stand beside her at an altar, promising forever. That moment in the valley wasn't just a rescue mission. It was the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined. But before we understand how that day changed everything, you need to know who Elise Grant was before the radio call, before the chaos, before the blood, before the choice that would define her career and her heart. That morning started like every other morning at FOB Falcon. The desert sun climbed over the horizon, turning the sky from purple to gold, and the heat started building before most people had finished their first cup of coffee. Elise walked the perimeter like she always did, checking sensors, scanning the wire, making sure her squad was sharp and ready. She was a ranger, part of the 75th Ranger Regiment, one of the most elite rapid response units in the world. Her job wasn't glamorous. It was checking gaps in the fence line, running drills until her boots wore through, and preparing for the moment when quiet turned into chaos. She'd done multiple combat tours by that point. She'd been through selection, ranger school, and countless firefights that taught her one lesson above all others: stay calm when everyone else panics. That morning, she reported to Sergeant First Class Marcus Reed that her sector was clear, but they both knew that clear around Ravenrock Valley didn't mean safe. It just meant the storm hadn't hit yet. Elise carried the weight of other people's lives on her shoulders every single day, and she did it without fanfare, without needing recognition. She just did the work. That's who she was. That's why, when the call came through, she was the one they trusted to run toward the fire. The emergency channel erupted with a voice that was strained, urgent, and raw. SEAL Team Alpha had been ambushed in restrictive terrain. They were heavily outnumbered. Their commander was gravely wounded. Enemy fighters were dug into hardened positions with clear lines of fire, and the team was running out of time. This wasn't a help-if-you-can situation. This was life or death. Marcus Reed didn't hesitate. He looked at Elise and gave her the mission. Her squad would be the assault element, the ones who punched through enemy lines and secured the seals for extraction. Everything happened fast. Briefings on the move. Gear checks while running. Quick intel updates that painted a grim picture: enemy fighters in elevated positions, clear kill zones, and a commander who couldn't lead because he was bleeding out. For Elise, the calculation was simple. If they didn't reach him, he died. If he died, his men fell with him. She gathered her squad, looked them in the eyes, and made a promise that was as much for herself as it was for them: we're bringing them home. No speeches. No motivational rants. Just a simple, unshakable commitment. That's what leadership looks like when there's no time for anything else. The helicopter ride over hostile terrain felt like flying into a storm. The pilot warned them about enemy guns tracking their approach. Elise stared at the terrain map in her lap, memorizing every ridge, every ravine, every place where cover might exist. They had seconds to process what most units get hours to plan. The helicopter dropped fast, and before it even touched the ground, rounds were slamming into the dirt around them. Her squad spilled out, weapons up, forming a hasty perimeter under fire. The enemy was dug into the hillside with perfect firing lanes, and every step forward felt like walking into a vice. Elise immediately shifted into small unit tactics: suppressive fire, movement by bounds, using every rock and fold in the ground to inch closer. She made hard calls in real time. When to push. When to drop. When to expose herself to keep her team moving. Her point man finally spotted the SEALs: 4 operators clinging to cover, their commander lying motionless among them, and hostile fighters closing in from 3 sides. Retreat wasn't an option. It would expose the SEALs' backs to machine gun fire. The only choice was to punch forward and smash the enemy off them. Elise gave the order and led from the front. In the chaos, she dropped multiple attackers, moved through fire like it was just another obstacle, and physically threw herself between incoming rounds and the wounded commander as medics slid in behind her. This wasn't reckless bravery. This was calculated risk taken by someone who understood that leadership means being the first one in harm's way. With enemy positions finally collapsing, Elise's squad formed a protective bubble around the SEALs. She knelt beside Daniel Hayes, who was pale, bleeding, and still trying to ask about his men instead of himself. She helped stabilize him, tourniquets, bandages, quick pressure checks, while directing her rangers to cover the withdrawal route. The medevac helicopter dove in, taking sporadic fire from fighters who refused to quit. Elise and 2 rangers grabbed Hayes and hauled him toward the aircraft as bullets chewed into the dirt around their boots. They loaded him onto the ramp, and just before he was pulled inside, he gripped her sleeve. His voice was barely a whisper, breathless and raw, but he managed to say a few words, thanking her for saving his men and his life. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a movie moment. It was just 2 exhausted soldiers sharing a fragile, honest exchange in the middle of hell. The helicopter lifted off, and the valley slowly went quiet. Later, higher command dissected the operation as a textbook example of small unit leadership under fire. Elise received commendations and was recommended for advanced leadership courses. But for her, the thing that stayed wasn't the medals or the praise. It was that quiet thank you on the medevac ramp, the sound of a man who knew he should have died. Years passed. Elise continued to serve, attending advanced courses, leading more missions, building a reputation as someone you wanted on your team when things went bad. Daniel spent months recovering, then returned to command and led a successful mission against the insurgent leaders behind the ambush. Their lives ran in parallel, same world, different lanes, but without contact. Until 4 years after Ravenrock, when Elise got a phone call while she was back stateside. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and steady. "This is Commander Daniel Hayes. You pulled me out of a bad place once." He told her he'd never stopped thinking about that day. He asked if she'd consider meeting him for dinner so he could thank her properly. No radios, no helmets, just 2 people sitting across a table. She hesitated, not out of doubt, but because it was strange hearing a voice she once heard only through pain and gunfire sound whole and at peace. She said yes. That quiet acceptance was the first step of a new mission neither of them had planned. Their first dinner was simple. They talked about Ravenrock, but they also talked about childhoods, families, fears, and the loneliness few people outside the military truly understand. Over time, their paths crossed more, joint exercises, ceremonies, planned meetups when deployments allowed. What grew between them wasn't built on adrenaline or drama. It was built on quiet understanding. Both knew what it meant to carry responsibility, to lose people, and to keep going anyway. Eventually, Daniel proposed during a ceremony honoring elite personnel, with friends from SEAL units and Ranger units watching. Their wedding took place in a military chapel, filled with the same kinds of people who were at Ravenrock that day: Rangers, SEALs, pilots, medics, and family. Elise and Daniel stood at the altar in dress uniforms, decorations on their chests telling a story their vows only underlined. She once risked everything to keep a SEAL commander alive in a valley of gunfire. Years later, that same commander promised to spend the rest of his life standing beside her. Some missions save a life. Some missions save a heart. And the rarest ones do both.